So this presentation is going to be a little bit longer, more like half an hour instead of 20 minutes. And you'll see why.
Great. Good morning. Katrina Strathmann. I am a plant ecologist with Mid-Columbia Fisheries, and I work on riparian restoration for Mid-Columbia and with a lot of partners in our area. I'm presenting the first of 3 riparian grant program proposals this morning. So from now until lunch, we're going to be talking about riparian grants or riparian work. This first project is part of a larger project, which is the Lower Kittitas Floodplain Restoration. And I think part of the Zoom is covering this, but their early action, we're talking about early action projects. So that riparian, the floodplain reconnection project is currently in design. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But these are early action riparian as part of this larger project. And before we leave this amazing photo that I'm borrowing from Kittitas County, it's very cool because this is the most dynamic part of the Kittitas Reach, right up from the canyon, where we actually have an agrading bar with multi-age cottonwood developing. The other cool thing about it is that up here you can see part of the project area that I'm going to be talking about, and even some of the early plantings that were the early action plantings part of this project. This project is happening as I said, part of the larger Yakima River Corridor Plan project, which occurs within the Kittitas Reach of the Yakima River. It's over 6 miles, largely in public ownership. And there's been work going on in this area since before 2015. So most recently, the Bureau of Reclamation Shockey Floodplain Restoration Project occurred just upstream of the area that I'm going to be talking about today. And we're talking today about the Ringer Reach of the Yakima River Corridor Plan in this Kittitas Reach. And it's a 3-mile long project that's shown in roughly in the yellow. That is 595 acres. It's owned by Kittitas County and the BLM. And let's go on to the next slide. So this is the Yakima Corridor Ringer Reach Floodplain Restoration Project, the 595 acre project, in which these 3 early action sites are located. And there are several strategic documents under which this larger floodplain restoration project is tiered, including the Steelhead Recovery Plan, and the 10-year habitat plan from the Habitat Subcommittee that talks specifically about the value of floodplain function and floodplain reconnection. But just in interest of time, I wanted us to focus just for a minute on where this bigger project got started, which is in the 2015 Yakima River Jeffries Levee to Yakima River Corridor Plan assessment that really started to highlight how to connect floodplains in this area. So that document, which pulled out some of the work that I'm going to be that is included in the floodplain reconnection, illustrated or underscored how this type of floodplain restoration and side channel connectivity, as well as restoring the riparian forest of floodplains, is really a priority for salmon habitat. And this reach is spawning, overwintering, and rearing and migratory habitat for ESA listed steelhead, spring chinook, coho, and cutthroat trout, and it's designated as critical foraging, migratory, and overwintering habitat for bill trout. As I said, I am a plant ecologist and not a fish biologist, but fortunately, we have two fish biologists, one in the room and one on the call, as well as numerous fish biologists. And this project, as I said, has been vetted numerous times through not just the Salmon Recovery Funding Board. So I'm talking today about the riparian restoration within this project. So just to give you a little bit of more background on what's happening in the floodplain reach. So you're looking at the results of hydraulic modeling for our conceptual design, and we're moving on to the 15% right now. So this is the modeling of the existing conditions. This is modeling of future conditions. This is all at the 2-year 7100 CFS of modeled conditions for our existing conceptual design. And as I said, we're moving forward right now past that. But I wanted to give you just a little bit of a flavor for what is happening, which is increasing flood frequency on the floodplain and reconnecting side channels with a goal of eliminating failing levees. So it's one of those wonderful Venn diagrams where flood management and habitat management is coming together. So we are expected to have the 15% design early this summer. 80% design is expected by the end of 25. And then this time next year, we should have the final design. With construction beginning in 27. And one thing I did want to mention is that as Mid-Columbia's riparian ecologist, I am part of the design team helping to steer this project, for which riparian habitat is a critical goal, is a key goal, and really incorporate that from the ground up in the engineering and construction design. So the goals of this riparian work that I'm talking about right now is to provide floodplain roughness to the floodplain and shading to both current and future side channels. But what I want to point out is the reason that these are early action is that during construction, there are areas where we will be losing access following construction, following activation of channels and more longer duration of soil saturation. So we're going to be seeing more wetland areas and more flow across the floodplain. The other thing about big projects like this, we've got 595 acres already in conceptual design. I provided the conceptual riparian design for this project, and there were 118 acres that came out that would, outside of staging and access rehab, due to grading and side channel connection, that would be rehabilitated. That is a lot of acreage. So one of the things that we're trying to get ahead of is capacity challenges, which are both plant material challenges, bottlenecks, contractor bottlenecks, labor bottlenecks, by spreading this out over time. So we're dealing with, basically, we're here today requesting this early action work because of lack of access and also that large scale project capacity. Okay. All right, so I'm going to start. Oh, and let me just back up. To show you the 3 projects before I jump in, so you can kind of keep yourself located. Okay, so worksite 1 is North and South Spring Creek. So we've already done 10.5 acres or 10.6 acres, if you're counting, of riparian restoration that are in addition to that 118 acres that I mentioned. So Spring Creek was was revegetated in 2020 and then supplemented in 2022. So that's about 6.6 acres. We also rehabbed 4 acres, and this was a combination of Kittitas County and Mid-Columbia work. Mid-Columbia and the BLM collaborated on 4 acres just downstream of Worksite 3. And then our stewardship request today is an action project a project that is in construction at the moment. And that's 17 acres. So all of that is in addition to, as I said, the 118 acres. This is an image of the existing restoration of North Spring Creek. I think Stephen took this maybe last week or the week before, so it's hard to see because leaf out is just starting. It's hard to see the riparian, but this is the roughly 6.5 acre, restoration area. And our proposed work is extending it down here, south of the planting area, and then also upstream just off of the image. So we'll show you that in just a sec. So we were standing here looking downstream, standing kind of at the beginning of our project, looking downstream in that image that you just had. So we're proposing work immediately upstream in North Spring Creek, and this is 5.6 acres. So what you're looking at here is for our conceptual design and our initial hydraulic modeling, you're looking at existing conditions on the left and modeled proposed conditions of our conceptual design on the right at the 1.5 year flow, which is roughly 6,000 CFS. So what we're expecting to see in this area, which is the initiation, this is where Spring Creek really just starts to seep out of the ground. So most of this is saturated in the early spring, like now under current conditions, and then dries out hard as a rock by midsummer. And what we're looking at is just wetting this area up more when the levees, which are just upstream, are removed. So it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to restore an area that currently has water on it or is in a saturated condition for a lot of the year. Just to give you an idea of what we expect that to look like, this is our 7,100 CFS flood that occurred on March 7th. And this is looking upstream from that point at flood flow across the project surface. So this is what it looks like. We don't have any floodplain roughness. It's all herbaceous vegetation. And then looking downstream at the same time, this is the Spring Creek channel that's forming, and then it pours into, this is the restored habitat. So this, until planting, this looked exactly like what the area that you're looking at. It was just herbaceous vegetation that was heavily grazed. Okay. You've seen the ecological benefits. This is current conditions. So when it's not in flood right now, it's really, except for these swales, it's not wet. However, if you're a plant ecologist, by reading the vegetation, you know there's a lot of wetland vegetation in the vicinity. So we know that there are times of the year when it gets wet and stays wet. So we'll be honing in on that. The downstream site is 600 acres, 600 stream feet. And I think I neglected to tell you at the upstream site that that's a 5.4 acre area, and we're expecting to revegetate along 1,100 feet, stream feet of channel, with some high density and standard density plantings to provide roughness. So this is a 600 stream foot area that's just under an acre. Just up from where Bridget is standing, immediately upstream is the previous revegetation areas. And we're proposing in this fairly small site to extend the planting in an area that's going to be seeing more water. We know that it's moist. We know that it sees water regularly based on the presence of reed canary grass. To plant 575 trees and shrubs into the 100-foot wide riparian management zone. Okay. So you're probably asking, how do you do that? So I'm just going to walk you through some of our techniques. So reed canary grass is a huge problem in a lot of our riparian and wetland areas, and it's really hard to get things established. So you're looking at images here of another project that's actually immediately on River Right, from the project area, where we treated reed canary grass, came in and brush cut it, and then it was ready for planting. So we're proposing to do similar kinds of things on South Spring Creek. At North Spring Creek, we have more of a broadleaf weed control issue, which is largely about broadleaf weeds and reed canary grass that are going to compete with planting. So you'll hear me say that over and over, but a lot of the things that we're proposing are to make the riparian reforestation successful. So we also know that groundwater at this site is up to 3 feet deep or over. So in conditions like this, especially where we don't have access, it's logistically not reasonable to do any kind of short-term irrigation. We use a deep planting method, and this is in the 2022 installation of plants along the Spring Creek project. We do this by using a couple different methods. This is a hydraulic ram that pushes plants, these tall plants here with like 5 to 10 foot tall stems on a tall rootstock deep into the soil, as deep as 6 feet, so that the root mass is in contact with moist soil, so that we're giving those plants the best possible chance to survive, to establish and survive. It's a method that we've used on a lot of different projects. This is what they look like. So typically they're going to have a minimum of a 13-14 inch root on up to 5 or 10 foot tall stem, compared to, this is a larger kind of containerized plant that has, that's a 10 cubic inch plant. So that's kind of mechanistically how it works, but I think it's really important to point out that what that means is that we're really reducing the suite of species that we use to those species that are adapted for floodplain conditions of inundation and sedimentation, and they have the ability to develop roots when they're in moist, dark conditions in contact with the soil to produce roots at nodes. So instead of producing a leaf at a node, they can produce a root. So which is what this image is doing. Thanks, USDA. So most of our species are willows. And this is in order of those that have the strongest rooting capacity to the lowest rooting capacity of alders, and depending on the moisture condition, dogwood. So we have a much smaller kind of planting palette, to use that term, in these projects. So at North Spring Creek, as I said, we're going to plant over 2,600 trees and shrubs in that over 5 acre area, and just under 600. We can also, I wanted to show you an image that there's not just one way to do deep planting. Another thing that we've done very successfully is to use a smaller auger when we're only going 3 or 4 feet, and a hand crew. So lots of different ways that you can get those plants in the ground. Okay, another challenge that we know of here that Kittitas County encountered in the Spring Creek project was heavy deer browse. So they erected a large, almost 5,000 foot fence around that 6 acre site. And the point I want to make about this herbivory deterrent fence is that it's a temporary thing to help us protect the investment at the plants that we have installed. And And that's just until our plants exceed browse height or until the plants can support resprouting. Because remember, we're planting species that have the ability to resprout heavily once the roots are established. If they're browsed heavily before the roots are established, there's higher likelihood of mortality. So we're proposing to put a fence, which you can barely see in the brown hatch mark around North and South Spring Creek. And then remove those once plants exceed browse height. And based on what we're seeing at Spring Creek, we think that's probably going to be 2029 within the project period. So stewardship is, as I said, just mentioned, the reason that we do stewardship is because we want to not just put the plants in the ground, but we want them to actually achieve those project goals of shade and roughness. And without supporting riparian plants, they're not, and it's different than a construction project. You can't just stick them in the ground like a tree in your yard and expect that without tending it, we're not gonna get it to grow. There are some situations where we can do that. But really, we're trying to protect our investment because putting plants in the ground is not cheap and there is labor involved. So in this project, we're looking at maintaining the fence and then removing it when the trees and shrubs exceed browse height. And the same with weed management is that's again a short-term thing until the plants exceed the height of weed competition. So, and then we can pull those things. And all of our projects, to the extent that we're able, involve implementation monitoring to see, we want to know if we need to adjust, if we're meeting our project goals. And that's actually a really small cost that people always want to know, are we getting what we paid for? And that's the way that we do it. So I'm just trying to be upfront that it's a very small cost, but that's one thing that we try to do. So just to sum up the approach here, and I did provide detailed budgets in PRISM for each of these, like line item by line item. I did not include it in the presentation for time, but I just wanted to show you that that in 2026, we're proposing to do the planning, permitting, and implementation, which is crunching it together quite a bit, but we want to beat construction, which will be going on in fall of 27. So we want to have these plants in the ground when water and getting established already when water hits them. And then stewardship in 27 through 29. So that looks a lot like this is a generalized restoration, riparian restoration timeline that Mid-Columbia Fisheries has understood works over time. And I just wanted to introduce it to you all to show that the approach that we're proposing here is not real different from what we use at any of our other projects. And that's how we see the kind of riparian success that we do. A lot of times when we're talking about riparian planting, we all think about what's happening here the year of construction, but there's site preparation and there's stewardship or maintenance, whatever you want to call it, that's required for 1 to 3 years following restoration. Okay, I'm going to move on to the second work site, which is on BLM property. So the first one, all of the ownership of the Kittitas, the Yakima Corridor Plan is in Kittitas County or BLM ownership. Is what I wanted to restate. So worksite 1 is Kittitas County, worksite 2 is BLM. So a lot of this is going to look real similar. So I'm just going to breeze past some of the methods that we just discussed, because they're going to be very similar. So just make sure that I'm not, it's kind of a drag not being able to have my notes on the computer. I'm very much in favor of notes to make sure that I don't miss a lot of the high density information I want to give you. Okay, so worksite 2 is owned by BLM. It's 35 acres. It's in the south part of the Yakima River Corridor project area. So just up, you can actually see in this image, this is the Ringer Loop boat launch down here. So the river is actually the southern extent of the project area. I think I'm gonna go a little over, but I think it'll be good. Okay, so in both of these drone images, so here you're looking kind of northeast across the site, and you can actually see the Cottonwood Seedbed Worksite 3 in the background. And then over here, looking southeast, you can see the part of the 4-acre planted area that we installed in 2020 and 2022. Okay, so this project we're also anticipated to lose access, but for a little bit of a different reason. So on the right image, you're looking at the conceptual design cut fill of side channels that are going to be taking water that's coming across the floodplain and moving it out. Now, these are probably going to change, but I want to explain to you how we are conceiving of this project so that we can still move into this area that will be inaccessible following construction. So, looking at LiDAR, we know that these areas in the green shading are lower elevation, probably based on some soil pits that were just dug last fall by Kittitas County as part of this project. We know that these are 2 to 5 feet deep to groundwater. And there are higher areas here. These are not planned for excavation, only the channels are planned for excavation. However, we're moving from conceptual to final design. And so what we're proposing is this 11-acre area, which is essentially 11 acres where the configuration will shift based on the actual location of channels in the final design. So if you need me to repeat that, let me know. But that is an important piece, that because we are moving towards final design right now from conceptual, we know that there will be work in this area. And I'm working closely. In fact, I have yet another meeting specifically with the designers we're revisiting regularly the need for early action and where the design is going, so that we're well coordinated and they're shifting and we are shifting our project. So, and that's one of the benefits of working together on that design team. Let's see, I think that's all I wanted to show you there. So again, reed canary grass treatment, you've already seen that. That's going to be step 1 of site preparation. We also know that there is an irrigation ditch that's 1 to 3 feet deep, 20 to 30 feet across, including the throw piles from the ditch. It's historic, but hasn't been found to be eligible for the historic register. So that is going to be part of our permitting and cultural resources assessment for this, but we want to grade this area so that it's not inhibiting the ability for us to effectively plant and then have to redo something later. So we're trying to look at anything like this in our early action project areas that we need to get done first. So this is one. And then this is at the 10-year in our conceptual design. This is just showing how it's capturing flow and moving it, which could be fine, except that it's definitely moving it in a linear form. This is the old side channel scar. So we're going to be talking about that again this afternoon with our design team. Okay, deep planting also proposed at this area. We don't want to get involved in irrigation to get plants established because of the loss of access. And we will still have access for foot traffic to do weed management, but no, we just don't want to have to drive excavators over there. I fully believe that we should not, if we're deep planting, there's no way that you can physically do that work with a shovel. You need to have heavy equipment involved. It's mechanized. Okay. So again, we actually have really specific information, that 4-acre site that's immediately adjacent to that. We did not initially fence these areas, and after 2 growing seasons, this is what we had. So we kind of activated adaptive management, changed course, erected a fence. And this was 3 years after planting. So this is not even today's condition. So we're really, really happy with how this worked. But I'm not going to propose that these guys are going to be able to deal with browse and edging right now. You may lose your bottom 5 feet of tree, but you're still going to have a lot of roughness and shade. Okay, and same stewardship activities and goals here. So let's see. So again, and same approach where early planting in 26, stewardship in 27 through 28. And I think the only thing that's different in this project substantially from in terms of specific actions is that regrading that's necessary. Okay, so now I'm going to move into our stewardship project, which is a little faster. Shane. Okay, this is a 17-acre project. Again, this is already funded as part of and already in implementation. So I'm not presenting this as a new implementation project. It's underway. And the cool thing about this project is that we are piloting an innovative technique, which is looking at how we can use cheap, large-scale agricultural methods to bring down the per plant cost or per acre cost of riparian restoration. So planning and permitting was done in 24. Implementation is going to be complete this year. We're actually working on that right now. The irrigation system is arriving and will be installed in May, and will be ready for seed fall in that'll begin later in May. So we're requesting stewardship for 26 through 29. So just to visit this a little bit, so you kind of get what we're asking for, is that again, we're in this project, we are mimicking cottonwood and willow regeneration conditions by creating suitable colonization sites, those bare substrates with tilling. So by plowing and disking. We also have surrounding parent trees. We're going to be doing some seed augmentation this June. And we are using an irrigation system that I'll introduce you to keep soil moist at seed release and then provide groundwater during early root growth. So at minimum during the first year, and I've been working, Chris Hogue has used this on a small experimental scale, so has Stuart Rood. Chris Hogue strongly recommended having a second year of irrigation ready to go in projects that he's worked on. So again, the goal of this is to provide floodplain roughness. This yellow area is the 17-acre field. At conceptual design, we had a side channel that is moving through here. This was approved by Surf Board, so we know that there will be a portion of the project that we lose, but we will have a net benefit, net gain of a minimum of 10 acres. And in the first take on 15% design, we're not to 15% yet. We don't even know if the side channel will be here or right here. So there may be less of an impact to this field, but in any case, there will be a side channel immediately adjacent to this area. So our stewardship or maintenance objectives are to complete a second year of irrigation. So our irrigation system is hand line sets with risers and sprinklers. One thing I wanted to point out is for every project element that I am showing you today, we do cost benefit analysis, looking at whether we're talking about planting or weed management, and this is true of irrigation too. Is there a cheaper, more effective way? What is the cheapest, most effective way to do this project? And so in order to reduce labor costs, we went with the hand line, that's where we have sets all up and down the field, because labor is our most expensive long-term cost. The other thing that was super important is that we want this to be reusable. So when we're done with this project, once we have a kind of a proven method, we can use all of this equipment elsewhere to do this work. So maintenance means operation, which at this point is it will be every 3 to 5 days based on temperature and humidity. Checking all the sets and sprinklers, refueling, it's a diesel fuel pump, and doing general maintenance, as well as about a week at the end of that second season, removing the whole system for reuse elsewhere. We also are set up to do weed suppression through plants through the end of the project to help with establishment. So that's going to be one of the biggest issues for the cottonwood seedlings is weed management. So we're set up to do both suppression in the perimeter and access roads, so we're not bringing new weeds into the project site, as well as spot treatment throughout the field. So if we see a patch of, say, mullein, for those of you that have farms or fields, you know that there are certain species that occupy a lot of space, and those are the ones that we're really concerned about. And then finally, this image shows our draft monitoring design. So we're going to be evaluating, because it is a pilot project of this innovative technique, evaluating seedling densities in 3 years of the project, with a goal to provide a minimum of 300 live saplings per acre, which is comparable to what we do in other projects. So I think this is just showing you the approach again. So installation is being completed this year. So we're asking for these elements of stewardship. So irrigation just in 26, and then weed management and that implementation monitoring in years 2 through 4. So here's our project budget. And again, each of these projects has detailed project budgets, line item by line item in Prism. And they are also broken down by year, which will show you what is being requested in terms of implementation, and in terms of stewardship. I just wanted to close by making a couple points about this larger project, which I don't have an illustration for, about wildlife habitat. One of the goals of the floodplain restoration project in general is to create wildlife habitat throughout that 595 acres. And there is also a recreational trail that is being planned. That's not something that our design team is involved in at all, but that was one of the requirements of that project, and also to have an agricultural use area in the floodplain reconnection project. And with that, I'll stop for questions.
I think so.
I don't know whether it will work with your timing or your budget, whatever. I've seen all that hand line you're looking to spring for on the Facebook marketplace. Lately, there's been considerable amounts of pipe that probably a third of it has been paid for new. Of course, price of aluminum is gonna go up here, but I don't know whether you have to go to public bid on everything or what your rules are. There's stuff out there that you got money and we can get it.
Thanks, and I'm gonna defer a lot of our irrigation questions to Carson Brisky, who's here, and he's been working really hard on figuring out, there were several things about the irrigation, which again is not part of this project, but I'm happy to answer because we're requesting stewardship, but Carson worked really, really hard to figure out something that was gonna be flexible for reuse, that would reduce labor, for current operation and, we basically just put together a memo of like all the different elements that we were considering and then disregarded. Because we originally thought we were gonna do, for example, wheel line. And then movable hand line. And, you know, once we started to look at labor costs, it was just, it was too expensive, or we wanted to be flexible. We have a lot of amoeba shaped riparian restoration projects, and we didn't want to be locked into like just being able to do something that was like, you know, a specific geometry.
So with the deer browse fence, if you're going to be cut off from areas, how do you propose to remove it?
That's a great question. We have removed fence before using physical labor, and I think that we can carry those. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Carson, but we can carry the rolled up material that we have removed from other projects across using foot traffic. But the issue with getting the plants 3 to 6 feet in the ground, it's not physically possible to do that without a machine. So we're looking at what do we need a machine for versus what can we do reasonably with a hand crew. So that's a great question, and that's exactly how we're thinking about this work.
Question from Nathan. What is the source for the irrigation water? Is that source associated with a water right or an irrigation district?
It is a water right, oops. So we're pulling out of this pond, and Kittitas County has a water right that came with the acquisition. Thank you for the question.
Way back in the beginning, where you showed where the other streams were gonna, it looked like there was a couple of ponds that we're not connecting to.
Are you talking about one of the worksite 1 or 2 or?
Well, like very first beginning of it, where you got the blue stripes coming down and then to show you added more water
Oh, right, yep.
and. Oh, well, maybe back up.
I think it's a little bit further back. Oop, maybe I missed it.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
there. Okay. You got some ponds over there that you're not connecting to, and I'm
These?
just curious, well down, lower. So I'm just wondering why.
This one is not, it is not in the project area. It's a private. Well, actually, I don't know if it's in the project area or not, but it's a privately used. You can look at.
I think that's privately owned.
Yeah,
That one
It's
is.
not, it's still owned by the Nora.
Okay. So
They
you-
retained it along with the house site.
Mhm.
Okay, so you don't have a delineation of what.
I didn't include the project area, like actually, these are from our conceptual design hydraulic modeling.
So where'd all the trailer houses go?
Yeah, Kittitas County has removed those, and there's more that's being planned for removal.
Because they
Yeah.
moved that one out, they moved out the one by the fairground, the one where all those people are living. Anyway,
It'd be on the right hand side, it looks like it's a levee. I mean, each one of them has it, it's going north and south,
This,
yes.
yeah, that's Stone Road, and actually as part of the design, there was because there's a need to protect housing, homes and infrastructure from flooding, that is actually gonna be lifted. So this will be a higher road, to protect the houses, and that was one of the terms of, in working with the private landowners that are immediately adjacent. So Kittitas County, as you know, is also wearing the hat of the flood management zone district and is really working hard to basically restore a floodplain connection, but not increase risk for landowners.
So you're saying 300 cottonwoods an acre? Is that just for them to, from the, we live there, 300?
They will self-thin, but
Oh.
riparian densities are much, much higher than conifer densities. And I know, actually, Stephen can also attest to this, after looking at stem densities and riparian habitats, like it's, 300 is an extraordinary underestimate of what floodplain roughness usually looks like.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a follow-up question about the water right. Have you looked into it very much about the parameters of the place of use or how it's been used beneficially over time? Do you know if the water right's in good standing?
Yes, I have been working with Kittitas County on that, and I don't have the details. Is this Nathan?
Yes, this is.
Okay, yeah, I don't have the details on the top of my head right now, but we definitely, in order to, that was part of our planning process. So I'd be happy to dig that out and include that, in the proposal, if that's helpful.
And this was an irrigated field until 2 years ago, and I believe it's the same, right?
Yeah, it's been, exactly, yeah, it's a converted Roundup ready alfalfa field.
There's nothing else. Move on to the next one. Oh, Mark says, what happens in the absence of early action?
Oh, that's a really great question. Likely what we would be seeing if we did not work on North Spring Creek. I actually, for both of the early action projects, which are not, which are implemented, we're proposing permitting through implementation and stewardship. We would be hard pressed to see riparian vegetation getting started there. So, because there's gonna be very little access in North Spring Creek because of saturation. We could probably stick some cuttings in there, but our goal was to put plants in the ground so that when we're actually developing roughness that, for these frequent, surface flows. And in terms of the worksite 3, that area would probably just stay bare as is. We would be planting immediately adjacent to the channel during construction. But I'm not saying, like never say never. It's possible to potentially come back in 10 years with, a different kind of more expensive ask because of access issues. In terms of the stewardship, what happens if the early action, if there's no stewardship at the worksite 3, the Cottonwood seedbed site? Certainly if there are, we have high temperatures, low soil, low moisture that we expect to see. If we see leaf wilt in year 2 and can't irrigate, that is likely a death knell for, basically our goal in the first couple of years is to avoid leaf wilt until those roots are established.
Awesome. Thanks, Kat.